thank you so much for joining us today for this interview. Maybe just to start off, I'd like to get to know you a little bit better. So maybe you could tell me about yourself and what you're doing with Black & Veatch.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Lee Mather. I'm a Vice President and Director for Southeast Asia. I live here in Jakarta, Indonesia. So Indonesia is very near and dear to my heart, but I do travel all over Southeast Asia. Predominantly Philippines, Vietnam, Singapore, Thailand, and some others. I've been with Black & Veatch for about 24 years. The first 16 years I spent in the U.S., so I'm pretty well versed in the U.S. Market for power. And the last about 7-8 years here in Asia, 3.5 years in Beijing, now 4.5 years in Indonesia. Predominantly my background has been power EPC projects. All over the world. And as of recently, though, Black & Veatch has undergone a pretty major reorganization. So we're not just power-centric anymore. We try to focus on all of the infrastructure solutions across the board. So that might be power, it might be water, it might be telecommunications, oil and gas, the list goes on. So I have kind of purview in my role over all of that type of critical infrastructure.
Right. And it's great that you've mentioned that you're currently based in Jakarta. So you're actually you're really on the ground here. And how would you say the state of the energy transition has been, say, in Jakarta over the past 5 to 10 years or so?
Yeah, so I do have the great advantage of having kind of boots on the ground here in Indonesia. I also have the distinct advantage of being able to compare and contrast with what else is going on in Southeast Asia, in other countries. Yep. I would say the state of the energy transition in Indonesia is at its very beginning. If you kind of look at the map of Southeast Asia and what the current energy mix is, country by country, you would look at Indonesia and you would see that it is very still coal dominant as a major source of power. Even as recently as last year, an additional 4+ gigawatt was put on the Jawa Bali grid. With that being said, there is some movement and momentum to bring in new sources of energy. Yep. Everything from LNG to power, some renewable energy. There's also a lot of study work being done with respect to hydrogen and ammonia. There are also and have been some developments kind of in the wing, getting ready to get deployed with respect to geothermal and hydropower. Yep. When I compare and contrast Indonesia to the rest of Southeast Asia, I would say that Indonesia is in the best position to take full advantage of the energy transformation. And I say that because of the great wealth of resources in Indonesia. Much more so than other markets in Southeast Asia. So like if you think about it, geothermal. How many places in the world have such an abundant supply of such a natural resource, geothermal? Hydropower. Again, such an abundant supply. I think with hydropower, I forget the exact numbers, but there's only like several gigawatt that is currently installed capacity. There's a plan to bring that all the way up to 10 gigawatt by the end of 2030. It's pretty near term. Yep. And there actually has been some various different data points, but anywhere from a potential of 60 to 90 gigawatt of hydropower. That's an incredible amount of energy. So if you think about this predominantly coal-based market as it is today, and the ability to transition and replace that existing power asset, there are a lot of natural resources to do that. Renewable energy, again, is another thing to sink our teeth into. Solar energy, I think there's only 1 gigawatt of installed capacity in Indonesia. Yeah. There's an ambition to grow that tremendously to several hundred gigawatt. Those numbers are debatable. There's always a big ambition, but how much can actually get developed, we'll have to see. Wind energy, yes, some. I think a bit more opportunistic. Indonesia doesn't have quite as much wind as other parts of Southeast Asia. Plus, the challenge is the topography. it's not like you can go put a lot of like wind turbines, you know, in a flat field.
Yep.
Nope, these are going to be on mountainous ridgelines and more difficult to access. And then, of course, the LNG to power, I think, will play an important part of that. We're seeing already some LNG to power projects getting ready to come online, of which Black & Veatch has been a part of some of those projects.
Right. And, you know, I was going to say that, well, you're right in that Indonesia has quite an abundance of resources here. So what would you say are some of the, what would you say has been holding Indonesia back a little bit from implementing or from tapping into these resources a little bit more? Is it the technology? Is it the framework or the support?
Well, the technology is certainly there. I mean, even if you look at like, well, we call it new, cleaner fuels like hydrogen or ammonia, a lot of people talk about these things like it's brand new technology. Well, it's not.
Yep.
You know, when I was a kid, we were learning how to make electrolyzers in my science class to make, you know, to get hydrogen out of water. Ammonia, fertilizer plants have been around for the past 5 decades, 6 decades. You know, so technology, it's there. A wind turbine is a wind turbine. A solar panel is a solar panel. The efficiencies are getting better. The blades are getting bigger, but the technology is there. LNG, you know, certainly that is a very mature industry as well. With respect to hydrogen, ammonia, of course, the issue there becomes, well, yeah, we can produce it very easily, but can we transport it? But that technology will come along. So the technology is not holding it back. I think to some degree, there's a couple of things that are going on in Indonesia. Not only are we trying to do an energy transformation or transition, but we're trying to do it while it's growing. The economy is growing, the population is growing, the demand is growing.
Right.
So you're trying to transition and grow. Okay, so how to get that kind of amount of infrastructure, new infrastructure deployed quickly enough to also keep up with the growth? Also, how do you do it affordably?
Yeah.
Right? And I think that's a big part of it, and probably one of the largest challenges is that, frankly, coal energy fuel as a fuel is much cheaper.
Yep.
Right? And so it really, there needs to be some additional things that are kind of put in place to incentivize, you know, the movers and shakers, if you will, to really get this energy transition kicked forward. You know, how do we make LNG to power on a cost parity with coal? So probably some government policy, government regulations, some financing type of incentives. You know, people talk about, you know, carbon credits and things like that. Another thing to kind of think about is, you know, we talk about green energy, but, you know, so like hydrogen, for example. I mean, is there really a market for it? Are there off-takers for the hydrogen?
Yep.
Are there off-takers for the ammonia? And so I think a lot of people are also kind of waiting to see, well, is that market going to really mature itself? And most conservative companies don't want to be the first to move, right?
Yeah.
So I think those are the kinds of things that are maybe causing the horses to be a little slow getting out of the gate.
Fair. But I mean, when it comes to implementing these technologies, we've spoken to a few people, and by and large, people are excited. They want to implement these solutions. There is an actual demand for it. Yeah. But as you said, well, no company wants to be the first to be the tester in this kind of a field. How can we get around this?
Well, here's what I would say, and I'm going to unintentionally kind of plug a company like mine, Black & Veatch. So if I'm one of my clients and, you know, looking at how do I transform my business and how do I move away from these old existing assets and go into this energy transition, you really need a trusted partner to help you with that.
Right.
Right. It can't be like 3 or 4 people sitting around a boardroom, you know, kind of should we not? It really takes some, you know, global thought.
Right.
From a strategic perspective, a feasibility perspective, does this make sense from a business point of view? And then a technical feasibility, can I really implement it? So you need companies like Black & Veatch that are engaged with hundreds of clients all across the globe that are all contemplating the same kind of question. And also that some of these clients, Black & Veatch has helped them find a way to move forward and take that first step. We're doing a project in the United States where they're using wind energy to power electrolyzers, to make hydrogen. They're storing hydrogen in salt caverns in Utah, and then they're burning 30% of the hydrogen in a combustion turbine to make power. So those are people that are taking those first steps. So take that information, that knowledge that was learned in one part of the globe, and bring it to customers here in Southeast Asia. So that's what I would encourage. Find the trusted partners to really help advise you and plot your course.
But of course, even in bringing these ideas and these concepts forward to Southeast Asia, there's going to have to be some adaptability in the sense that, perhaps some factors are a little bit different. As you said, the topography might be a bit different, the culture might be a bit different, and of course, affordability would be one of the big factors. So is there a way that you can kind of bring these global examples into a more regional landscape and yet also make it affordable for the companies here?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, so that you're right. It is geographically specific, right? So while Black & Veatch might have examples from the United States, we also have 2,000 employees in Asia that can help make sense of that information and really make it specific and applicable to what we're trying to do in Asia. They are different markets, very different markets.
All right. And, in bringing this forward, we're also looking at an increasing interconnectivity with regards to, say, the grid, with regard to electricity, renewable power, and of course with ideas. So what are your thoughts on this? Where do you see it going forward?
Interconnectivity will be a challenge. So right now, the Indonesia power grid is predominantly set up to take on baseload power, which when we say baseload power, what that means is that there is not a continuing variability in the amount of power that's being put on the grid at any one point in time. So like, your traditional, fossil fuel type power plants are your baseload plants. They're just going to sit there and run along at 1,000 megawatts and stay there all day long, all night long. When you start talking about introducing renewable energy, particularly solar, into that type of a grid structure, what you have now is a big power spike during the day while it's sunny, and then a drop off at night. So is the grid resilient enough to be able to handle that type of variability? The answer to that is yes, with a bit of help.
Right.
Yeah. The other part of interconnectivity that, to maybe kind of put it in a broader context, is, well, here's Indonesia sitting here with all this wealth of natural resources, while the rest of Southeast Asia is not as fortunate to have some of those resources, like natural gas, for example. There's only 2 countries in all of Southeast Asia that have a ready supply of natural gas. Indonesia is one of them. So in terms of interconnectivity, should we export some of the power, some of this cleaner power?
Right.
Or do we use it here within Indonesia? And those are all kinds of things that, need to get kind of figured out. And of course, the market, the economy, the, profitability of making power is going to determine that. I think if I were running Indonesia, which I'm clearly not, I would focus here first to see what we can do here to make as much headway in the energy transition, levelize, before starting to think about how much, to go and export.
I see. And, in that case, do you think that we're going to see other countries place, different focuses, different priority areas into, maybe some will do hydro, some might do wind. Do you think we're going to see a lot of that happening?
I think there will be a great degree of variability. Like I said, like wind as an example, some parts of Indonesia work okay for wind, but again, you have to deal with the topography and whatnot. Whereas, countries like Vietnam, a very long, narrow country with a long shoreline, perfectly suited for wind. So you might see a lot more wind there than you would see in Indonesia. And geothermal. there's a great natural resource sitting here with geothermal
Yep.
to be taken advantage of that other countries don't necessarily have that available to them. And hydropower, I think also. The few countries are really set up to do well with hydropower. There's the talk, obviously, of moving the capital from Jakarta to Kalimantan.
Yep.
Well, there's a great deal of potential hydropower available in Kalimantan. What a great opportunity to set up, this new power system for the new capital and have it already embody that energy transition.
Okay. Well, that's looking towards the future. And speaking of, any plans that Black & Veatch is able to share for the future?
Yeah, so for the future, what we're looking to do is to get very client-focused. Not project-focused, but very client-focused.
Okay.
And really get in there as a trusted advisor to help clients with this very topic of energy transition and help them work through, the near-term strategy, the long-term strategy, and make sense of how they get from where they are now to where they want to go in the next 10, 20 years. So those are, as we talked about earlier, those are very complicated discussions, very detailed discussions, and it takes kind of that global knowledge, to really bring that into the boardroom to help with that type of decision making. So we're starting there. We're already well underway in a lot of those discussions to eventually help our clients get to the point where they're comfortable to take that next step, to really increment it forward to get this transition going. And of course, Black & Veatch is not just like a consulting or a strategic advisory type company. We're engineers, but we're also constructors. So we can do the front-end strategic planning, the initial engineering, feasibility studies, but we can also do the full EPC project.
Right.
Right. So in being that kind of trusted partner and helping our clients to develop from the very concept all the way to the finished product, putting electrons onto the grid, that's our plan. We plan to be there for that.
Right. And, in just being here at Enlit Asia, are there any particular observations or takeaways that you've made that you think are going to inform your future plans with Black & Veatch?
Yeah, my takeaway is the energy level, excuse the pun, is very high. People are excited, as you said, about the energy transformation.
Yeah.
And also very curious about what it might look like, how they might play a key role in that transition.
Yeah.
So that was one big takeaway for me, is just to see that excitement level. One of the panels that I attended this morning, a gentleman said, "There's not a second to waste. There's not a second to waste." That's how serious people are about getting this thing underway.
Yeah.
So that also says, people need help to feel comfortable to get it underway. So I'm very excited about that. I also think that we're starting to see the industry or industries coming together in very meaningful ways, right? So I'll give an example. We're here to talk about power and energy, but when we're talking about putting electrons on the grid,
Yep.
right? But there are other industries that are also under similar pressures. Like take the mining industry, for example, right? So how do miners make this energy transition as well? Here in Indonesia, there was a regulation passed that the raw ore that is extracted from Indonesia can now no longer be shipped out as raw ore.
Yeah.
It must be refined, right? So there's these large smelter projects being built, and every one of those smelter projects has an energy need, and it's captive power.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily pulling from the grid. So they're also faced with this challenge. What kind of clean energy solution am I going to use for this new infrastructure? So, you're starting to see these two industries kind of merging, right?
Yeah.
Converge. And also, let's use, for example, the hydrogen and talk about making a hydrogen market. Well, you need energy to make hydrogen,
Yep. Mm-hmm.
right? So where are you going to get your energy to make hydrogen?
Yeah.
Well, if I own, for example, a large fleet of clean energy, whether it be like geothermal or wind or whatever, well, on the one hand, I'm selling electrons with that. On the other hand, I could peel some of that off and put it in an electrolyzer and make hydrogen and then use that as a new revenue stream, right? So these are all, when we talk about making a transition for these companies, it's not just, how do I do something different within the energy space? It's how do I even possibly move into a new market, a new revenue stream?
Right. Okay. I think we see a lot of creativity coming from the market as well in this regard. All right. Well, that about covers it for the interview. I think that's all the questions that I really have.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the time, and thanks for having Black & Veatch here at Enlit Asia.
Likewise. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you.